Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Koon, alongside Glen West. And today we talk finally, Glen, we finally get to the baseball portion of the podcast. We've been teasing it over the last couple of podcasts, but today is all about the LSU Tigers on the diamond, where, Glen, we talked about it right before we started recording this. And I wanted you to kind of kick us off with this. This is a team that there's no secret how good and how far they can go. I think everyone says, hey, look, this is a team that can play in Omaha. But the injury bug has continued to bite this team, especially it feels like over the past couple of weeks and maybe into the next month. Is it crazy how much this team and Jay Johnson's been able to just absorb some of the contact, absorb some of the injury bug, and continue trucking along?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty special group, and I think probably the thing that plays into LSU's hand a little bit is that this has been a really offensive-oriented season, really around the country, and LSU is really no different from a lot of other teams around the SEC and around the country in terms of the injury bug. There's been pitching staffs really all over this conference that have really limited some of their success, but that hasn't been the case for LSU, and they've obviously been winning a lot of these games. They've won, I believe, 7 straight SEC series, or they've won all SEC series, but they've won 7 straight SEC games heading into this Auburn series that we'll probably talk about here some. But, yeah, I think the biggest kind of takeaway for me and just kind of writing that article that we put out earlier this week is that, yeah, this team is not perfect. There's some flaws, and certainly as the injuries start to crop up, it's going to be a lot less of a margin for error. But this is also a group that I think has, that kind of Omaha potential, and they keep proving it week in and week out that they keep winning these games, and they find ways to scratch out wins. The offense has been fantastic. A lot of the bullpen is now starting to really come along. I think there's some guys that you can really start relying on out of the bullpen a little bit more. And then you've got arguably the top 2 players in the country, and those are guys that could very well go number 1 and number 2 overall in a couple months here in the draft. And when you're starting with that baseline, that's a pretty good level of your talent and just kind of the potential of this team. And the other thing here is that I think LSU would have to do something ridiculously crazy to not be hosting a regional and a super regional later this next month, I guess, when the postseason starts. So you're going to have the backing of your crowd and all that stuff, and so I think it's going to be a really great wind down here for LSU in the home stretch, and they've got 3 winnable series here to kind of close things out. And it's kind of hard to believe that we're at this point here where the final game at Alex Boxa in the regular season is just week and a half, 2 weeks away against McNeese, and that's pretty incredible. So we'll certainly get into a lot more, but I think that's kind of the overwhelming takeaway right now is that this team can win in a lot of different ways, and that's going to really help them come the postseason stretch time.
Yeah, and let's talk about that pitching staff because, look, everyone knows who Paul Skeens is and what he can do at this point. I mean, every single Friday night, whether it's on SEC Plus, whether it's on a national broadcast, the highlight coming into the broadcast as they highlight some of the big players, it's Paul Skeens on that Friday or Thursday night when LSU's playing. And MLB.com came out with their draft prospects list, and up top, Dylan Cruz, Paul Skeens 1 and 2. I think one of the biggest concerns that I've seen just across social media and from some of the fans is, where does LSU go after? This is not a situation when you get in the postseason that Skeens can pitch every single day. You're going to have some people. So talk about kind of the emergence, and I know it's kind of been a little bit of a roller coaster, but Ty Floyd has shown at times where when he's on, and I'll go back to the Ole Miss game when he pitched that one, that was phenomenal. If this team can get consistent pitching on a Saturday, Sunday, let's just take the traditional 3-game series, how hard is LSU to beat if the pitching is there? I mean, you talked about it. It's very offense-oriented. But if Ty Floyd's pitching well, and whoever they throw on that Sunday, we've seen different versions of Christian Little kind of in that role heading into this weekend. But, I mean, how good does it make this team, and balance does it make this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably outside of maybe Thatcher Hurd. Ty Floyd is probably the biggest X factor on this team right now, just because you've seen it. You've seen it in the results at times that he can get you deep into a game. He can go 6, 7, hopefully 8 innings in a game every once in a while. But you're right. It's been just a little bit erratic. It's been up and down. It's been very hard to depend on and rely on, I think, throughout the course of the whole season. But he's shown it in large stretches that he can be a very successful pitcher in this conference. And we know that this is the best conference in baseball
Mm-hmm.
by far. I mean, it's not even close. But it's also a situation where, I feel like, yes, he didn't have a great weekend this last weekend against Alabama, for example, but no deficit is too big for this offense to overcome, and that's what I
Yeah.
really come back to. The pitching, if they can just keep it from getting an otherworldly level of difficult to overcome, like we're talking 8, 9, 10 run game here. This offense can come back, and it can come back quick. I mean, one of the biggest
Yeah.
points that I've made all season long um, is how good LSU is, not only in 2-out situations at the plate, but also in being able to really quickly revert back from a bad inning. And
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a bad defensive inning, whether it's a bad inning on the mound, this offense is really, really quick at being able to get the momentum right back and pushing the team forward in a positive direction. So, not trying to duck your question at all there. I think that, Ty Floyd is certainly a guy that I think LSU needs to rely on. I don't see him moving out of that starting role for the rest of the year. But it's going to be one of those situations where I just don't know that what you're going to get from him, like what you're gonna be able to get from Paul Skeens, and that's just, I mean, we're really comparing apples and oranges here. I mean, Paul
Yeah.
Skeens is one of the greatest pitching prospects we've probably ever seen, and a lot of these other pitchers on the staff are, they're, I don't want to say feeling the pressure, but there's a lot of that's a lot of stuff you have to live up to as a pitcher
Yeah.
on the staff, and I think it's going to be really important for those guys to really just focus on themselves, play within themselves. That's been a big mantra of Jay Johnson's all year long, is to not get out of your plan. I think that certainly applies to the pitchers as well, and so it's going to be very interesting. I don't know what to quite expect with this pitching staff beyond what Paul Skeens gives you, but that's a good thing, and it can also be a bad thing. So we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out here in the final several weeks.
A couple of things to note there. You talked about the big lead that if LSU surrenders, this offense, they don't have a lot of one-run innings. They like to put up crooked numbers. And so it feels like when they score in bunches, kind of alluding to what you were talking about. And then talking about Skeens in the sense of, I've seen, I think it was obviously Ben McDonald, a lot of ties to the program. He has continued to he obviously parlays a career in broadcasting with the Baltimore Orioles as well. And he has continued to harp on the fact, just watching on TV, that this is probably one of the most sought after pitching prospects we've seen since, and I don't know if you remember this, but since Steven Strasburg, and the kind of electricity he can bring on the mound. And so I think it's unfair, like you said, to talk about the rest of the pitching staff, because 95% of pitchers in college baseball are in the same situations that, Ty Floyd and all these other guys are in. They're good pitchers, really good, but they're also 18, 19, 20 years old in the sense of they still have a lot of growing to do. Paul Skeens, one thing, he's a grown man. And two, this guy is out here, like you said, one of the more dominant pitching prospects we've seen in the last decade, just from his stuff, his attitude out on the mound. He's just different. He's kind of he's an anomaly, I think, is when you look at the rest of this LSU pitching staff, it's hard to live up to what Skeens does on Friday night. But I wanted to bring up, kind of continuing to talk about the pitching, and it's another article you wrote that was fantastic, and I had right here in my notes to talk about, was Gavin Guidry and the role that he's taken on. A little different from him. It's a unique opportunity, something I don't think that Jay Johnson sees him in the longevity of his career in Baton Rouge. But right now, it's working. And so, one, the ability to have a kid that says, hey, I'll help you however you want right now, coach, that speaks volumes to have in your locker room, and especially now in the bullpen.
Yeah, I mean, we had a great 10 minutes with Gavin before they left for the Auburn series. And a lot of it had to do with just kind of the unique situation that he's been in this year. you come in last fall and you're playing short and you're playing second and you're thinking you're going to compete for one of those jobs as a true freshman. Um, I know this for a fact that LSU was sweating bullets on if they would be able to get him after the draft. I mean, he
Mm.
was absolutely in the conversation to sign. Um, but LSU I think was really on him and really talking to him about how he could develop into a really high draft pick here, and it was as an infielder. And so when you finally, or when you sit back and you see kind of the way this all played out right prior to the season, he was asked to throw a few bullpens as a pitcher in the spring, and all 2 weeks into the season, he's on the mound for the first time and does really well against Butler. I think he has a shutout inning against Butler with a couple strikeouts, and that really just kind of fuels what we've come to see now. And that was a nice conversation that Johnson had with Guidry about, hey, this is what we need from you right now. We need you to be another available arm on our staff. And
Hmm.
man, was that a good decision to to kind of scrap the infield deal because of what Jordan Thompson and Dugas are doing for you this year. They need that arm, and they need him to be that kind of confident, electric, almost I don't want to say cocky, but it's borderline cocky of how he kind of approaches being on the mound, and that's
Yeah.
really something that this bullpen needs, and I think something this pitching staff needs as well. And you saw it last week, and he earned a midweek start. He earned a couple more innings during the weekend, and that's going to be something that I think LSU really has to explore, is how much they use him kind of here for the postseason run. He's a guy I could absolutely see them using 2 times a weekend and trying to help you get through a regional or super regional. I think he's got that kind of electric stuff, and certainly doesn't feel like the moment's too big for him. We asked him about just kind of the moment he felt like he belonged on this pitching staff, and he goes back to that South Carolina game where LSU was down 7-3. They get the grand slam home run from Dugas. They get the 8-7 lead, and then they asked Guidry to go in there and get the final 5 outs, and he's able to do it in a very hostile situation against a team that they could very likely see in Omaha
Hmm.
or in the postseason. So, just a really great story, and it kind of just goes back to that point that had Johnson's really made. A lot of these players have really made, is that these guys are really adaptable to the situations that they're asked to be put in, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to help this group get wins. And so, for a guy like Guidry, whose future is likely in the infield, for him to kind of punt on this season and say, "Hey, I'm going to focus on this aspect of my game and really lean into the pitching side," I think it just speaks volumes to him. It speaks volumes to where this program is at, and I think it's just going to be a really a great ignition, I think, for LSU to have Guidry out of the bullpen as one of those options.
Yeah, and look, it's a little weird to see a single digit on the mound, that's for sure. But I think that when you take a step back and you realize the kind of men that Jay Johnson's bringing into the program, like that's in a sport where reps are so valuable, and on a team that's loaded, any opportunity you get can be something you can put on film, whether it's a transfer, whether it's go to the draft. For him to essentially say, like what you said, to punt on the freshman year, really development in the infield, and say, yeah, I'm going to go out here. And not only, Glenn, is he good, like he's electric. And as a pitcher, I'll say this, a lot of people, there's a big argument. Do you like the flair? Do you not like it? To me, as a pitcher, you have to have the mentality that you are the best out there. And I think we see it on Friday nights with Paul Skeens. We see it on that first game of the series. But to have a guy that can come in the back end of the bullpen, and people in the stands feel confident sometimes saying, okay, like, we know this game's going to end. Like, that is such a relieving fact to know if you can get it to the 8th or ninth inning and you feel comfortable where you are. And that's where he's kind of slid into that spot, and it's really nice to see.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I would probably throw in Griffin Herring and Javen
mm-hmm.
Coleman into that grouping too. I think those three are the guys that you can really, for sure, say go out there and get me a couple zeros.
Yeah.
I know Coleman had one kind of weird game there where he allowed
Yeah.
a
That
couple
was an
hit
anomaly. Yeah.
runs. That happens, and he's still coming back from that injury. But I think those three are the ones that you can say, okay, here's the ball, go get me a win, go get me 3 innings here, and those guys will be able to deliver. I think Bryce Collins, Riley Cooper, those guys are probably in that next tier in terms of reliability. I mean, I know Bryce Collins has had a really nice last several weeks, but there's been also some up and down in terms of what you can really rely on from him in those late game situations. So I think the bullpen is in a better spot than they were, let's say, 3 weeks ago, which is a good thing. But I also think that they need a little bit more out of that group, and certainly that three-headed monster, I think, of Guidry, Coleman, and Griffin Herring, I think, is going to do wonders for this group out of the bullpen down the stretch.
We could get into this conversation, and the podcast would probably go 45 minutes long total, so we'll try to keep it to a minimum. Glenn, at this point in the season, is there a player on the field? And look, Dylan Cruz is amazing. This Tommy Tanks, they're all fun to watch. But what Gavin Dugas brings in that lineup and what he's able to do, is there a more valuable and maybe nationally underrated player on LSU's roster than Gavin Dugas, and just the tone that he sets? I mean, you can talk about the bats they have in the middle of the order, but what he's able to do, it seems like when he's out of the lineup, we saw early in the season, they struggle to get some things going. I mean, what impact has he brought on this program as we get kind of ready for the home stretch?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, in terms of the field, his ascension at second base was probably the most important element to LSU having the kind of season that they're having right now. And he's come away with some really big-time swings this season. I just mentioned the South Carolina hit, but certainly there are several more you can throw in there as well. Dugas has been huge. I think he's been probably the biggest X factor in terms of what you thought maybe going into the year, and then how it kind of played out during the year. He's exceeded expectations, I think, and really hasn't made that second base competition much of a competition at all, like we thought it might be early in the season, where they would be playing a bunch of different guys. I know Nipple had some moments in there where he played a lot, but Dugas is the real deal. I think he's just a really good college baseball player. I think he just is really good for this team when he's in the lineup. And, he kind of battled through some stuff the last couple of weeks. He's been really trying to play through that shoulder injury. And I know there's a lot of conversation right now on our board of, LSU should have sat him a little bit and maybe given him a little bit more rest on that shoulder in the midweek games. Really felt like he found that second gear, or that prior to injury form against Southeastern earlier this week. He goes 3 for 4 with a home run, a couple RBIs. So I think he's well on his way to getting back and being the kind of impact player that we know he can be. He's been great. But then the other X factor that I'll throw in here, and I know we're getting back to the pitching here, but Thatcher Hurd, what he did this last week, really encouraging. I mean, he goes 4 1/3 in the midweek game last week. I know it's in a loss, but he was the bright spot of that loss to Nichols. And then he goes another inning over the weekend against Alabama, puts a 0 on the board, strikes out a couple guys. If they can get Thatcher Hurd back into form, and I know that's a big if right now because it's only 2 outings in a row, I absolutely think that's the game-changing X factor that LSU has, in the cards that you didn't really expect a couple weeks ago. And so if you can get Thatcher Hurd back into what he was doing last year at UCLA, we saw it earlier this year against Texas, how good he can be.
Yeah.
If he can find that confidence, build on that confidence and momentum heading into postseason play, that is a absolute Omaha national championship kind of game changer that LSU needs on that staff to really carry them into what they hope to be a deep run in the next couple months.
Yeah, and it all starts this weekend. Like you mentioned, LSU traveling to the Plains, going to Auburn. Auburn enters this series with a 25-18-1 record. They tied with USC after USC had a getaway day. 9-12 in the conference. I think if you asked any Auburn fans, which not a lot will watch this, but if you asked any Auburn fans, they would say not the season they were really wanting, a step back for them after getting to Omaha last season. But look, it's the SEC. Anything can happen. And Auburn's a team that I think, and talking with some folks, they struggle in the pitching department a little bit. Not where they want to be, and as the fact that they have arms. I know that they had a young man, and his name's escaping me, that was on the preseason Golden Spikes Award watch list. But coming into this season, I think if you'd have told LSU that you would be in the position you were, all the injuries, and heading into a road series at Auburn with only a couple weekends remaining in the regular season, they would have said this is a pivotal series, against a team that is still talented, but just not where they want to yet. Glenn, kind of any thoughts on this weekend? And I mean, we know the fans, anything short of a series sweep is going to be a disappointment, but what is realistically expected this weekend?
Well, look, I mean, it's one that, on the surface looks like Auburn might not be playing its best baseball as a whole this year. But this last weekend, they knocked off number 2 South Carolina. They took 2 out of 3 from South Carolina. In South Carolina, they won their first 2 games, and then they lost game 3 by 1 run on Sunday. So this is a team that is capable of having these kinds of weekends, and you just saw it last week against the Gamecocks. And so you're right. It's probably more of an offensive oriented team, just like a lot of teams in the SEC are this year. It's not been a very good league for pitching, or really any pitching in the country as far as I'm concerned. But it's going to be a really interesting matchup. I know that LSU. Coach Jay Johnson talked about it a little bit yesterday when we were talking with him. The game plan and the plan of these players for LSU can't change. It doesn't matter who they're playing. That has been a really consistent theme for him, and it's something that the players have really taken to, I think, throughout the course of this year. I think that LSU's in a really good spot here. They can build on some of this. We talked about it. They've won 7 straight SEC games. They're really seem to be finding their form on offense. I mean, they've scored, I think, 65 runs in the last 8 games. Their pitching staff, while the ERA might be a little bit up, they're also holding opposing teams to a 220 batting average, which is not stellar. I mean, it's not great, but it's enough, I think, to make you believe that this team is starting to find its form a little bit. Their LSU, I think, is really starting to hit its stride offensively, and that to me is probably the most important thing. And really, it's the fact that the offense carries. I mean, like the amount of free passes that they draw, the patience they have at the plate. That's stuff that can work in any environment. And, it's not like they're relying on the long ball, or they're relying on contact. They're really just relying on, okay, let's last long enough in this at bat to get the pitch that I want. And I think that's where this offense's biggest strength is. And, they've really, really dialed into it in the last, I would say 2 or 3 weeks. I think this is probably the best they've played offensively all season, and that's a good thing.
Auburn's going to throw sophomore right-hander Chase Alsop, who comes in with a 7.62 ERA. He's been out of the bullpen. They're trying to find that combination. Saturday's going to be a fun one to watch because Auburn is throwing Tommy Vale, who, talking with some Auburn fans this week, they said, hey, we feel like that's our best starter, going into this contest. He's got a 4.1 record, 3.8 ERA, and he's a graduate veteran. And then Christian Eberholtz on Sunday. But Glenn, you mentioned it right there. Why I think they can have a successful weekend in Auburn is because they don't rely on just one big thing. When you see teams say we live and die by the long ball, or we have to string together 3, 4, 5 hits in a row to win a baseball game. That's dangerous, because if a team comes in and says that if we stop them from this, we can win. And I just don't think LSU's in that situation where, hey, a team can say, if we stop this, we'll win against LSU. Your thoughts on that? I mean, I just think they're so balanced as a lineup.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no greater example of that than what you've seen with Alex Melazzo, the catcher, who really struggled his first 3 years in the program to have any kind of success at the plate. And now he's batting .360. He's putting the ball in play. He's been a regular starter for really the last month of the season, and he's come away with some really big at bats, some really big swings to help LSU win some of these games. his development, Travinsky, you look at what he's done at the plate and how, he doesn't have a whole lot of opportunities up until a couple weeks ago, and he comes in a pinch hit situation. LSU's down to their final strike, and he delivers a 3-run homer to help them win that game on the road at Ole Miss in Game 3. Those are your bottom level guys. Like those are
Yeah.
the bottom guys that you're really hoping for in terms of production. And so when you think about it in that way, this lineup, I think, is just playing at a really elite level. I think they're 440 runs, are number 2 in the country right now total, behind Florida Gulf Coast of all things. I was looking at that stat earlier today. I was like, Florida Gulf Coast. Oh my gosh, really good. But yeah, I mean, it's just a really impressive a lineup from top to bottom that the guys have stayed really consistent all season long. And yeah, I mean, that's what's going to carry them into Omaha this year. It's going to be their offense. You're going to hope for some really nice pitching outings here as the postseason winds down. But yeah, this is going to be the identity of this team is certainly offensive oriented, and that's kind of how this season's played out around the country.
It feels like they got a little bit of an embarrassment of riches behind the plate when we talked coming into the season about, who might start, what would it look like, Alex Melazzo's journey back from injury.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about Ray Neal, who has been out
it's
for
nuts.
the last month. And, it's like he's not – it's like it doesn't matter that he's gone right now, and he's a guy that was a really, really solid player for them for its 2 months of the season. So, yeah.
A little bit of embarrassment of riches for sure. They're going to be first pitch in Auburn, I think 6 p.m. Central tonight, so obviously fans can check that out. We'll kind of have a little how to watch and stay tuned, but we know LSU fans are rabid about their baseball. They'll know where to go, know how to listen, no matter where the Tigers are. It's going to be a fun weekend. We'll have in-person coverage. I'll be over there. Because that's one of the few things, Glenn, that when you don't live in Baton Rouge and you live 30 minutes away from Auburn, Alabama, you can just scoot on over and get back home and maybe be home before midnight. So we'll see. Probably crossing fingers. We'll see how it works, though. It'll be a lot of fun. My name is Bryce Koon. This is Glen West. We had so much fun talking about college baseball, and there's more to come as the home stretch officially begins this weekend. LSU at Auburn for a 3-game series. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this podcast in audio form, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, or anywhere that you get your podcasts, make sure to follow us, subscribe, and share with your friends. Hey, the road to 3K is almost there. We hit it up on the boards. I think we need around 49, 48 more subscribers. I've got a plan on something. I've got to run it by the big bosses of Glen West and Sonny Ship before. We'll see how they take it. But if it does, we're going to have some fun fan interaction on the show that I think is going to be something that some new content that's going to be a lot of fun here on the YouTube channel. We'll catch you next time here on the Go 24/7 podcast.